If you have gold rings, gold earrings, I'll give you cash. I love gold. Bring me your old gold and I'll give you cash. Because...
Oh, hi! You caught me selling my otherwise useless gold for cash. Hey, speaking of gold, let's talk about Michael Golden and how influential he was to an entire generation of comic book artists. Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Michael Golden. He is a favorite artist of mine, thanks to his artwork in books like The Nom and Bucky O'Hare. He's a unique artist in comics in that he hasn't had a lot of long runs on titles, and he's outright said that he doesn't prefer working on superhero books. But he's also had a huge impact on other comic book artists. I'm talking superstar artists like Todd McFarlane and Art Adams. They've specifically mentioned Michael Golden as an influence and an impact on their career. So today, we're going to take a look at the career and the influence that Michael Golden has had on the world of comics. I'd go so far as to say he's the godfather of Image Comics because he influenced that whole generation. Folks, before I go too far, please consider hitting like and subscribe so that you can see more videos like this. And without any further ado, let's dive into it. Michael Golden was born in October of 1955, and he said repeatedly in the few interviews that he's engaged with that he didn't read a lot of comics growing up, can't point to any particular comic influences, and sort of fell into the career. A good example of this is this audio clip from a 2016 interview with the Worst Comic Podcast Ever.
I started out painting vans and surfboards and skateboards and that sort of thing, and then it translated into doing storefronts, and then it went to advertising. Advertising art.
Okay.
Graphic design, very little illustration, thankfully. And then as a lark, one of my clients, commercial clients, said, well, he knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. You should be doing comic books. To this day, I'm not quite certain what that phrase meant. But I flew up to New York one day, and as far as I know, I'm the only one who's ever gotten work at both Marvel and DC on the same afternoon.
However, that may not be entirely accurate. Golden began working in comics in November of 1977, and he gave an early interview to the fanzine Wizard in April of 1979, where he specifically mentions he read early Jim Steranko work and aimed his career at breaking into comics based on that. Either way, he had a unique entry into comics by working for Marvel and DC simultaneously with no previous indie or underground comics work. Golden said that he was hired by both companies on the same day, and that might be so, because House of Secrets issue 148 and The Defenders issue 53 were both out in November of 77. By January of 1979, Golden was the illustrator for a new Marvel comic, The Micronauts, with Bill Mantlo writing, and it should be noted that Golden was credited as a co-plotter. He'd go on to have one of his longest runs with 12 consecutive issues. Micronauts was based on a toy line by Mego, which was in turn licensed from the Japanese company Takara's Microman line. In the Bronze Age, artists and writers were less interested in working on licensed books because they generally paid less than the superhero titles. But Golden has said that he is less interested in drawing superheroes, and while he has done some work in that field, you'll notice that most of his prominent work is less about superpowered folks running around in tights. Michael Golden explained this in his own words in an interview with Inner Space Online, a site about Micronauts, saying, quote, "Jim Shooter just asked me if I wanted to work at Marvel, offered me $10 more a page than what I was getting at DC. And I said yes. Mind you, that was only $28 per page at the time. He said that they had this thing sitting around called Micronauts. I wasn't really interested in doing it because I was already doing 2 books a month over at DC, and they were superhero books, and I really wasn't interested in doing superheroes. So Shooter threw out this idea about what the Micronauts were, without actually telling me they were a toy tie-in at the time. But it wouldn't have made any difference because it was presented to me as a science fiction adventure. And I was cool with that. It sounded more like something I'd be interested in. So when DC imploded, I went to head over to Marvel and did Micronauts. End quote. Eventually, Marvel asked Bill Mantlo to include more superhero stuff in the Micronauts title since it was ostensibly set within the Marvel Universe. By the time characters like Captain Universe were being created for the book, Golden lost interest. He continued to work at Marvel, but asked to do books like Howard the Duck and Doctor Strange that were less superhero than other options. And if you'd like to look at only one comic to see what Michael Golden is capable of, I recommend Doctor Strange issue 55. It's just incredible storytelling. In that issue, Michael Golden employs a number of techniques that contribute strongly to the story's emotional and psychological weight. His penciling is very detailed. There's a textured cross-hatching and carefully rendered shading that heightens the gothic, surreal qualities of Strange's visions in the story. Golden also draws heavily on contrast between light and dark. A lot of the panels plunge Strange into deep shadows or silhouetted horror, which underscores the nightmare logic of illusions and inner turmoil, appropriate for an issue using the villain Despair. I would also argue that Golden is a master of perspective, especially distorted fisheye lens type shots that lend towards surreal and dreamlike imagery. Facial expressions and body posture are rendered with exaggerated anguish when Strange is under psychological duress, which makes the demon Despair's manipulations feel more visceral. This is where Golden can pull away from realistic towards cartoony because it emphasizes emotion. Finally, Golden seems to pay homage to Steve Ditko's classic Doctor Strange work, with creatures, otherworldly beings, bizarre dimensional backgrounds, but updated with his own, more modern, dynamic energy. I see panels here that were super likely to have influenced others. The eyes and mouth on Doctor Strange in this panel are reminiscent of how Art Adams drew characters in Longshot. And this panel of Doctor Strange in action, with his eyes in dark shadows, really reminds me of how Jim Lee drew characters during his X-Men era. Another incredible example is Marvel Fanfare issue 47 featuring Spider-Man vs. the Hulk. Look at this composition, with Hulk filling out the whole foreground, emphasizing his size. Or the exaggeration here on Spider-Man's eyes, which isn't realistic, but it sure sells the drama. The interplay between darkly inked areas and open line art to draw the eye across the page, I would consider that masterful. Or how about this absolutely insanely detailed shot of a devastated city? In the more rare cases of Michael Golden working on straight-up superhero stories, he co-created Rogue in Avengers Annual No. 10 with writer Chris Claremont. And while he didn't create Man-Bat, he did help re-envision the character as a private detective with writer Bob Rozakis in the pages of Batman Family. Soon enough, Golden would be working with Man-Bat's co-creator, Neal Adams. By 1984, Golden was working for Neal Adams Continuity Studios, going back and forth between comics and commercial art. He worked closely with Larry Hama on 3 consecutive projects, the first one being Bucky O'Hare at Continuity. This creator-owned comic leaned into adventure and included talking animals that were technically aliens. It let Golden and Hama work on something that they were both passionate about, and it went on to get a cartoon, video game, toys, and that rewarded them both financially. A great space to let Golden go nuts on his more cartoony instincts and have it feel totally appropriate. Golden did a number of covers and short stories for G.I. Joe with Larry Hama, and also was the first artist on The Nam, which told historical fiction stories set during the Vietnam conflict through the eyes of rotating U.S. service members. Hama, a veteran who served in country, oversaw the title, and Golden illustrated for 10 of the first 12 issues. It features some of the most realistically detailed machinery and vehicles and backgrounds that you would see in comics at the time, which helped contrast the more expressive characters. The run, with art by Michael Golden, was very realistic, showing characters die, getting involved in real battles, and realistic behind-the-scenes day-to-day life at the base camp. Oh, and the covers, they are dynamic and intense, some of the best out there. In fact, I'd say that Michael Golden is a masterful cover artist, someone who really comes up with exciting imagery that sells the story inside. There's always an interesting angle, great composition, good balance between light and dark, rock-solid gesture for characters that help give it energy, and then an area that he'll focus on rendering some incredible detail. Some of my favorite covers include The Nam, The Punisher, and Batman on Detective Comics. Apparently, someone that appreciated Michael Golden's art was rock star Glenn Danzig, because his band, Samhain, clearly used the skull Michael Golden illustrated on the cover of Crystar, and that was never credited. Golden has never been compensated either. Still, Michael Golden is, in my opinion, one of the best to ever do covers for comics. And I think his mastery of energetic compositions and detailed rendering influenced the entire Image generation of comics, making him a godfather of that era of art. He influenced Art Adams and also influenced the Jim Lees and Todd McFarlanes of the day. Here is a smattering of superstar artists mentioning Michael Golden as an influence. And let's start in chronological order with who he influenced. We'll start with Art Adams. So here's an example. In 2002, Art Adams was interviewed in Comic Book Artist issue 17, and he mentioned Michael Golden as a big inspiration, saying, quote, "The first time I thought about comics as something I wanted to do was when I bought and read the very first issue of Micronauts by Michael Golden and Joe Rubinstein, written by Bill Mantlo. So, when I saw it, I bought lots of copies of that one and was giving them to everyone I knew in high school. And they were looking at me like I was insane, and I'd say, look, that's what I'm going to do." In a 2011 interview with Comic Book Resources, Todd McFarlane said, quote, "I've been a fan of Michael Golden's almost as long as I've been a fan of comic books. He's been a huge influence on my artwork over the years." Back in 1990, the editor of the Spider-Man titles, Jim Salicrup, interviewed artist Todd McFarlane in issue 81 of Comics Interview. And I asked him how he came up with the popular design of Spider-Man's webbing. McFarlane instantly credited Golden, saying, quote, "The webbing idea came from an old black and white piece. Years ago, you guys used to put out these black and white portfolios, around 1980 or something like that. And there was one piece that was The Defenders by Mike Golden, and for whatever reason, he had Spider-Man in it. He did this great Spider-Man with this funky webbing, and I kept that piece out of all the pieces. And I'd go, if I ever turn into a comic book pro, and if I ever work for Marvel Comics, and if I ever get to do Spider-Man, I'm going to do webbing like that." Aside from McFarlane, another Image Comics founder that mentioned Golden is Rob Liefeld. In an interview with Alex Grand on Comic Book Historians, Liefeld said,
"You know, when I grew up, Perez, Byrne, Michael Golden, they did annuals and they really resonated."
Obviously, Liefeld liked Golden, as he will say homaged this famous G.I. Joe shot for a cover of New Mutants. Image Comics co-founder Eric Larson mentions Michael Golden on the Direct Edition podcast, saying,
"There's a lot of Michael Golden influence in all of us, and I think we're all kind of going, this is the guy."
And while I couldn't find an interview quote by Image founder Will Spertatio, he did hire Michael Golden to do a cover for his book Wetworks. In passing, Image founders like Mark Silvestri has called Golden brilliant, and Jim Lee posted artwork on 2016 to Facebook where he specifically calls Michael Golden an inspiration. As you move into the second wave of creators that were making their own books at Image, you find people like J. Scott Campbell mentioning Golden as an influence in Inside Image number 6, soliciting for his new series Gen 13. In an interview with the Comic Archive, Dave Johnson mentioned Golden as an early influence, saying,
"Most of my career I feel like I've been chasing after, trying to be like Mike Golden or, whoever. And now when I sit down, I don't really think about how to do things as much as I just do them."
And Joe Madureira posted to Facebook in 2013 listing Michael Golden as an influence. And these are just a handful of popular artists who have mentioned Michael Golden as an influence, with plenty more like Chris Bachalo or Kevin Nolan that you can easily find. To me, that means Golden has an influence beyond readers, but with a whole generation of artists that in turn reach out to more readers. An outsized impact. One mystery I couldn't resolve was what happened to the 1990 Superman annual that Michael Golden was drawing. DC advertised it, but it just never came out. You can find some of the unpublished pages online, but I can't find any interviews that explain what happened to this project. Golden eventually shifted away from regular comics work and these days does the occasional commission or cover. Golden has said that he prefers the control over his own projects and the deadlines in commercial illustration work compared to comics. So, be that as it may, totally understand and get that, but I think we can all be very grateful for his Bronze Age comics work. It influenced an entire generation of artists in turn. Now, if you'd like to see more of Michael Golden's work up close, there are several great art books. He puts out a great one called Excess, but the main one that I'd like to point you to is Michael Golden's Marvel Stories Artist Edition by IDW. Just a fantastic book that has some of his absolute best work from the Nom, Marvel Fanfare, Doctor Strange. Really, really good. So, folks, thank you so much for listening to me extol the virtues of Michael Golden's work. Just an incredible artist. I think that he might turn 70 this year, but he really did have a huge impact in comics, and he's one of my personal favorites, so much so that I've really been intimidated about making an episode about him for a long time. But hopefully I've done it at least a little bit of justice, interested you in his artwork. I will see you real soon. I've got a few more little things to say over the credits, but until I see you next time for a full episode, you remember what I'm going to tell you. Keep reading comics. Hey folks, it's Editor Chris talking to you right now. If you're watching this far, thank you. That means you're one of my most engaged viewers. I appreciate it. Please consider hitting like and subscribe if you haven't. And I'd love it if you considered looking at my Patreon. I've got subscription tiers as low as $1. For $2, you get access to all sorts of exclusive stuff. I could use the help right now. Part of the reason this episode was slow to come out is, sadly, my wife got laid off from a job she's been at forever, loves it, loves the company. The company was great to her. But they had some financial problems I won't get into, and they had no choice, unfortunately. Now I'm really proud of my wife because she's taken this opportunity to go back to college and get a degree, and I'm really proud of her. It's fantastic, but it does mean that I need to do something that's a little more stable and reliable. I've been spending more hours at my day job. Probably could have tried to make YouTube a thing, but what if a video doesn't hit and then I need to pay a bill? Dicey. Need to be a little bit bigger than I am right now. So unfortunately, that took some of my time and slowed this episode down. I think I can figure out a way to come out with episodes faster, even with this new dynamic. But anyway, I want to talk a little more about Michael Golden. Big fan. Finally got to see him in person at last year's New York Comic Con 2024. And I happened to bring a copy of the Nom #1 for him to sign. I was a little surprised because he did ask for, I want to say maybe $30 for a signature. And I was fine with that because I'm a fan and some people do that, but I want to put that out there because not every artist does that at conventions. Everybody's got different rules. Sometimes they'll only sign a certain number, or sometimes they'll only sign it if it's addressed to you specifically instead of just a signature because they don't want it to get flipped. Things like that. But whatever, I'm just putting it out there. There is a story, by the way, of Michael Golden's art agent being a little difficult to work with. It's just sort of a famous, funny story because somebody was asking about a commission that he'd paid for, and it took a little while for it to get delivered. Whatever. It was of Doctor Strange, and when he finally got it, it said, "Patience is a virtue," except virtue wasn't spelled right. So there's this sort of semi-infamous image out there. Patience is a viru. Oh well, just a little amusing. But I'm a big fan of Michael Golden, and so are a lot of the artists that you probably love. If you didn't know about him before, I hope this helped. If you already know about him, hopefully this aimed you at some stuff that you hadn't seen before that you can check out in more detail. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you real soon. Bye.